So FDR begins to face criticism over the New Deal. A lot of people say this is the government going too far. People will point to just as recently as the Gilded Age, government's only supposed to be there for matters of defense. Basically every other issue be left up to states. Now here the federal government is building power plants. Here the federal government is handing out checks to people that are of a certain age, handing out checks to people who can't work. This isn't the national government's responsibility. This is too much government going too far. So FDR is going to be facing a lot of criticism. Now, I should point out, a lot of Americans love what he's doing. If you're somebody who is out of a job, you're able to work because the WPA hired you for something, or if you're a young kid with no job prospects, you're going out to the CCC helping feed your family. You're really enjoying this. Or if you're somebody who, again, elderly, you're worried about being a burden to your family, but now you're doing okay. You really like this, but a lot of people are opposed to FDR's New Deal, and you're going to see a lot of criticism come in because of the way that FDR finances his New Deal programs. So you need money to pay for federal emergency relief. You're handing out money to the states, $500 million. That's got to come from somewhere. You're writing checks to CCC workers. That money's got to come from somewhere. Got to hire WPA workers. That's got to come from somewhere. You're building dams for the Tennessee Valley Authority. That's got to come from somewhere. Now, Social Security Administration, Social Security Act, that's something different. That's, young people paying for old people. That's set aside from other stuff. But besides Social Security, how's the government financing everything else? How are they building these dams? How are they paying these workers? This money is going to come from two places primarily. One, FDR will begin, and the Democrats during FDR's first administration, they're going to begin dramatically increasing the tax on the wealthy. Okay, so we had seen this progressive income tax go into effect end of Taft's administration, had dramatically increased during World War I, but then you get to Coolidge, want the wealthy to invest. It had dropped down significantly, something like 2% of the wealthiest, the income of the wealthiest are going to be going to the government. Well, what you see under Roosevelt is it will shoot up once again. The progressive income tax will be raised to where the top percentage of earners are going to be forced to pay 75% of what they of what they earn to the federal government. So if you're somebody who's wealthy, making $10 million a year, the federal government will take $750,000 of that. So 75% tax rate on the upper earners. Now lower earners, not nearly that much. But on upper earners, we're going to take this much money. So 10 million, I said 750,000, 7.5 million, and that 7.5 million would be paying WPA workers, CCC workers, that type of thing. So dramatically tax the wealthy. So if you're wealthy in the United States, you're going to get a huge chunk of your tax taken out. Another way that FDR is going to get money for this is the way the federal government gets a lot of money today, borrowing. The federal government will start selling bonds. If you have expendable capital, what the federal government will do is start selling a bond. Say, like, if you pay $20 for this government bond today, you'll get $25 back in 4 years, or you'll get $30 back in 4 years. But we need to borrow this money from you right now. So you buy this bond, you give $20. The federal government then uses that to pay WPA workers, CCC workers. Sure, you're going to have to pay this back later, but what FDR is hoping is that later, by that point, the government or the economy will have recovered, and then they can collect even more taxes, and they can pay people back. So borrowing money. So we borrow to get out of this. We borrow to pay WPA, CCC workers, things like that. And you're going to see during FDR's administration not only this increase in tax on the wealthy, but also a dramatic increase in borrowing. So you look at this. This is the debt. See, debt goes up obviously during World War II, but then the debt goes down during the 1920s. The government can pay off debt because it's getting taxes and the economy's doing well. But then, starting with this Great Depression, we need to borrow a lot of money. We need bonds. We need to do that type of thing. And those who can afford bonds, the wealthy, will buy these bonds from the government, and you're going to government will borrow it, and then again use the money for the various New Deal programs. So borrow heavily. Now, spoiler, we're going to see the government borrowing way more during World War II, but during the Great Depression, there'll be a significant amount of borrowing. Okay, so this is one of the ways that FDR is handling things. So heavy taxes on the wealthy. Now, a lot of people are going to look at this and say, hey, but didn't Coolidge cut taxes on the wealthy to encourage investment? Aren't you doing the opposite here? People would obviously argue, well, that might be why we got into this situation, the money disparity between the wealthy and poor that happened in the 1920s. But some people that are in business are going to criticize FDR for that. Some of the wealthy are going to criticize FDR because they don't like the fact that 75% of their paycheck is going to the government. So FDR is going to start facing a lot of criticism in the New Deal, and he's going to start facing a lot of criticism, particularly from the wealthy. They don't like that so much of their check is going to the government. So a lot of this criticism will come from the opposition party, the Republican Party. Now, the Republican Party been so hurt by Hoover's response to the Great Depression, and people generally blame the Republican policies of the 1920s for leading to the Great Depression, that the Republican Party's not going to have a significant opposition to FDR. They're not going to be a huge threat during his first administration. He's going to be able to pass things over their head, and even, spoiler, he gets elected for a second administration. He's going to be able to pass things over his head during the second administration. But that's still a good chunk of people who basically say, you're hurting the wealthy, you're hurting big business doing what you're doing, who criticize them. So it's going to face a lot of opposition from the Republican Party. He's also going to face opposition from within his party. So there's a guy who ran for the Democrats in 1928, this guy Al Smith. He's a Democrat. He was a businessman. He had lost to Herbert Hoover significantly. But when he starts seeing FDR taking all these actions in the New Deal, he basically says, this is the government going too far. I don't believe in it. I think the answer to the way out of this isn't the government. I think it's business. He doesn't want to go to the Republicans because he doesn't necessarily think that their model's good. So what you're going to see is almost a third party form in the United States called the American Liberty Party. Now, this isn't going to be a third party that's going to run as the American Liberty Party. You can almost think of this as like a bipartisan coalition of almost all Republicans who are opposing FDR and this handful of Democrats that think FDR is going too far. He's going too far left with his policies. So I'm going to step over here on the Republican side, vote against some of FDR's reforms because I think he's doing too much. So guys like L. Smith will actually cross the aisle to the Republicans, not completely switching parties, but just saying, I think what FDR is doing is too far. American Liberty Party, they actually, you'll see some Democrats support the Republican candidate in the 1936 presidential election against Roosevelt. It's almost like that Tea Party. I don't know if you guys remember that. It was a couple years back. It was touted as a nonpartisan party, but it was basically a Republican thing, and it was just sort of a name slapped on, Republican Party. That's almost what this American Liberty Party is. We want to make it seem bipartisan, but it's sort of pushing the Republican agenda, the Republican idea of government. But it is going to get some Democrats to cross over into it. So think about it this way. American Liberty Party shows that FDR is facing opposition from people on the right saying he's going too far with his programs. Okay, going too far. Now, a lot of this is going to go away in 1936 when FDR gets elected significantly, easily defeats the Republicans, and basically the American people are going to say, okay, whatever you guys are saying, we're going to ignore it because we like what FDR is doing. But he is going to get opposition from people saying he's doing too much. FDR will also get opposition from Democrats, particularly Southern Democrats, that think that he's getting government so big that, sure, we love the economic reforms. What FDR is doing is dramatically helping the South. So Southerners, a good chunk are poor farmers. They love things like the Agricultural Adjustment Act. They love the government helping them out with the CCC, WPA. They love the money coming in the federal government because they need a lot of help. Southern governments or Southerners love this big government. It's helping them out. But they're going to start getting nervous about things like Social Security. They're going to get nervous about Eleanor Roosevelt talking about helping African Americans civil rights. And you're going to see some Southern Democrats oppose FDR because they think, all right now he's mainly focused on economic issues, but by making the government so much bigger, doesn't this sort of open the door for the government to step in and tell states, hey, knock it off with these poll taxes, literacy tests? And some Southerners still feel remember all the way back to Reconstruction where the government was really big, and this nervousness is going to get some of them to sort of turn against FDR. Now, this is a small percentage, but these conservative Southern Democrats, conservative meaning on social issues, again, they love the economic reforms, will be nervous about where FDR is going. But again, this is a small percentage. Most love what he's doing at this time because it's really helping them out. So he'll face some obviously opposition from Republicans. He's going to face some opposition from Democrats in his party, thinking, you're going too far, and some Democrats that don't like, where he's bringing the national government because it makes them nervous about, the government stepping in and involving itself with social issues. So he's getting opposition from people saying you're going too far. He's also going to get opposition from people saying you're not going far enough. Now, some of these people that are saying you're not going far enough, like Communist Party members, Socialist Party members, this is going to be sort of on the fringe. Although we will see a dramatic increase in Socialist Party, Communist Party membership in the United States during the Great Depression. But in general, most Americans, those terms make them nervous, and most Americans think, okay, this is going a little too far. But there are some Democrats that are going to say, all right, well, maybe that's a little too far, communism, but what FDR is doing isn't enough. We need to use the federal government to do more. And the biggest opposition FDR is going to face within his party is going to be from this guy right here. This guy's name is Huey Long. So he had been governor of Louisiana in the late 1920s. He'd been a U.S. senator in the 1930s. And what he's going to do when the Great Depression hits is he's going to start touting this idea of a share our wealth society, okay? So he's going to say every man should be a king. We basically live on the richest country on earth, or live in the richest country on earth. We should have enough to provide for everybody, and every man should be a king. And they start calling him the kingfish because of this. Huey Long, this Democrat, is going to propose during FDR's first administration a new tax code, and he's going to say that this new tax code should limit personal fortunes to $5 million. So if you're somebody like John D. Rockefeller's kid, probably has a $100 million home, probably has $50 million in the bank, under Huey Long's proposal, the federal government would basically take that property, sell all of it except for $5 million. So you can keep $5 million, John D. Rockefeller II, but everything over that, the government's seizing, and then we're going to use this to hand out to people below it. Along with this, the personal incomes will be limited to $1 million a year. So this is 300 times the average annual income of the average American. So if you are Henry Ford, you make $10 million a year. We're going to go ahead and take $9 million automatically, and we're probably going to actually tax that last million too. But we're going to take all that money you make over $1 million, and we're going to use that to redistribute to the average American. Okay, so you can only be worth $5 million. You can't make more than $1 million a year. If you're worth more than $5 million, government's taking that. If you make more than $1 million, government's taking that. And what's going to happen with this money is that Huey Long would write a annual income check, and we talk about universal basic income today. Huey Long is basically the first major candidate to propose this, or major a political figure to propose this. He's going to suggest that this extra money should be written to households to where they get $2,000 to $3,000 annual check from the U.S. government. Now, I don't know what that would be today, but I imagine something like $20,000, $30,000 written to every household today. So take from the wealthy and give to the poor. Again, you could argue FDR's doing that already, but this is a kind of an extreme example of it. Now, people will come out and say, isn't this communism? Isn't this sort of forming a classless system if you're taking from the rich or giving the poor, making the poor richer, making the rich less rich? Aren't you bringing people into the same class? So aren't you a communist? Well, Huey Long's going to say, no, I'm not a communist. I'm not a follower of Karl Marx. I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, is what he says. I don't follow the Communist Manifesto. I follow the Bible. He's going to say this is what we should do as a Christian nation. Now, the thing with Huey Long is, he says this is the actual quote, communism, hell no. This plan is the only defense this country's got against communism. So basically he says that unless we do this, we're going to, what's happened to us is going to happen to Russia because the people are going to get upset that there's such a wealth disparity. Well, he threatens to run against FDR in 1936 for the Democratic Party candidacy on this plan of sharing the wealth. But he's not going to make it because in 1935 he's going to be assassinated, and basically, there's not going to be anyone to step up to replace him. So FDR gets criticism from the left saying he's not doing enough, and again, the right saying he's doing too much. Another area or another group that's going to criticize FDR during the New Deal is going to be the Supreme Court. Okay, so when FDR entered the presidency in 1933, most Supreme Court justices were Republicans. And if you think back, you had Woodrow Wilson from 1913 1921. He had put in place a handful of Supreme Court justices, but from 1921, when Warren G. Harding took over, to end of Hoover's reign, that had been 12 straight years for Republicans appointing Supreme Court justices. So most Supreme Court members, when FDR takes over, are Republican. Most of them are these pro-business Republicans. And a lot of these guys are going to look at the various things that FDR is doing and saying, this isn't what the national government should be doing. And a lot of these guys are going to be viewing FDR's various programs as unconstitutional. As we all know, the Supreme Court, one of the things it does is people challenge laws. It's appeal it up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will hear arguments, and if they determine the law that's being challenged violates the Constitution of the United States, they strike the law down. Well, because this Republican-controlled Supreme Court, a lot of these people opposed to this New Deal legislation, a lot of people will start challenging the constitutionality of FDR's various programs. Some of the things that are going to be challenged and struck down, we didn't talk about. But some of the things like the Agricultural Adjustment Act, the original written version of that's actually challenged, brought up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's going to look at it and say, where does it say in the Constitution that the U.S. government can write checks to farmers? It doesn't. They rule that as unconstitutional. Now, we're not going to talk about it. They're going to basically rewrite the exact Agricultural Adjustment Act exactly the same way. They're just going to rephrase the words to make it constitutional. But FDR is going to look at this and look at the Supreme Court striking down his New Deal legislation, and he's going to get worried because he's going to worry that some of the stuff that's basically been struck down initially is either stuff that's not working, he doesn't care that much about, or it's stuff they can reword to make constitutional. But he's worried that some of the stuff he does care about, like the Social Security Act, they're going to rule that as unconstitutional. So he's nervous. So how can I prevent these guys from changing or striking down the New Deal legislation I actually care about? Well, the only way, you could hypothetically kill these guys if they all died, then FDR could appoint a new Supreme Court justices, because per the Constitution, Supreme Court justices rule for life, and they're appointed. The president appoints a new one. But it doesn't look like a lot of these guys are going anywhere. Well, there are about 70 of them that are about 6 of the 9 that are old, but it looks like they're going to be sitting on the bench for a while. So what do we do about these Supreme Court justices? Well, FDR is going to come up with something in 1937 called the Judiciary Reorganization Bill. Judiciary Reorganization Bill. So per the Constitution, it says nowhere in the Constitution how many Supreme Court justices there needs to be. So for most of U.S. history up to this point, it'd been 9, but that number is set by Congress. So when the Supreme Court's first ruled the Judiciary Act of, was that 1789, there's only 6 Supreme Court justices. Now, that actually been decreased to 5, it'd been increased to 9. You could hypothetically change the number of Supreme Court justices tomorrow. If the president goes to Congress and it's a friendly Congress that agrees with them, they could change it to 1,000 Supreme Court justices, and then the president could appoint 991 new Supreme Court justices, because it's not a set number in the Constitution. It should be. I don't know why we don't have a constitutional amendment saying that, but that's something that Congress can change. It's just that they rarely change it. Well, FDR is going to determine that because these guys keep striking down his legislation, he is going to change it. So in 1937, he's going to push this bill called the Judiciary Reorganization Bill that's going to say that for every justice on the Supreme Court who is 70 or older, the president can appoint an additional Supreme Court justice. Basically saying if they reach a certain age, we can appoint an additional Supreme Court justice. And he actually puts a limit on 6. So every Supreme Court justice, 70 or older, the president can appoint a new Supreme Court justice. So there's 6 on there. So what FDR is thinking here is that if I get these additional 6, then, and there's 6 at the time that are above 70, this will bring the number of Supreme Court justices up to 15. So I've got 6 guys, and these guys, 6 happen to be Republicans opposed to his programs. Well, I appoint 6 new justices. That's going to make it to where I have 9 friendly Democrats. So 3 of the Supreme Court justices that they appoint are Democrats. But you add 6. Now this 9 is always going to outvote this 6 Republicans that oppose my programs. So I will no longer have my New Deal legislation overridden. So he proposes Judiciary Reorganization Bill. Well, when this word gets out about this, the public is going to be, again, the public likes what FDR is doing, but a lot of the public thinks this is going too far and is undermining one of the branches of government. So basically, the public says, what you're doing here, it kind of oversteps your bounds. We know what you're trying to do, and we think this is too much. And as a matter of fact, you'll see newspapers start calling this the court packing scheme. Court packing scheme, not Judiciary Reorganization Bill, but the court packing scheme. You're packing the court to get what you want. So a lot of people be opposed to it. Members of FDR's own party, Democrats, a lot of them are going to be opposed to it because they think, man, you're kind of going too far with this. Isn't this stepping in the direction of dictatorship if you're basically getting the president and allowing them almost direct control over a different branch of government? And this might seem like, something we don't worry about today, but in the 1930s, you look around and you see what's happening in Germany, Italy, Russia. You have these leaders start clamping down on certain portions of their government and taking supreme control. A lot of people worry that's what FDR is doing here. Now, I don't know if he wants to become a dictator or anything like that, but he's definitely going to be altering the judicial branch to do what he wants. So when the Judiciary Reorganization Bill goes to Congress to be voted on, it's not going to pass. It's not going to reach FDR's desk. It just doesn't make it through because too many people think this is going too far. But the thing is, it almost passes. So barely fails to pass. Well, FDR, he loses, but in a way he's actually going to win because right after this, we'll see the Supreme Court will stop striking down New Deal legislation. Now, I don't know if I buy this explanation, but a lot of people think it's because the Supreme Court realizes, hey, this almost passed, and if we keep doing this, this guy's eventually going to get this bill passed, and when he does that, he's going to pack the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court's essentially going to lose all of its power and become a puppet of the president. So we better start playing ball, and we better start finding at least some of this stuff constitutional. So Judiciary Reorganization Bill fails to pass, but the Supreme Court ends up changing its tune, and they'll stop striking down some of this New Deal legislation. All right, so thing is, FDR faces a lot of criticism, but again, he faces a lot of people like him. And this is kind of FDR's legacy, at least his legacy as far as the Great Depression. A lot of people are going to look at FDR in association with the Great Depression and say, this guy's a savior. You talk to some people that lived through the Great Depression, and they'll say, I wouldn't have survived if it wasn't for FDR and the reforms he made. FDR is one of the few presidents where you see people put up like portraits of him in their house. We don't do that for presidents for whatever reason in the United States. Maybe at least we didn't used to do that, but we basically view our presidents, we always view them with a wary eye, like we don't hero worship. There's not like kings, stuff like that. We maybe like them or dislike them, but we don't have this hero worship. Well, to some people, FDR saved their lives. So you'll see people with portraits of FDR in their houses, and they'll say, he's the reason I got through the Great Depression. Other people look at FDR, and they'll say, this is the guy who ruined America. He got the United States to be a welfare state with the Social Security Act. He started to increase the power of government with his various programs, Tennessee Valley Authority, opened the door for the federal government to gain too much power. So to some people, he's a savior. To other people, he's a destroyer. He destroyed the United States, and things like that. Very divisive president. You don't see a lot of people sitting there right there in the middle, and things like that. And to some people, again, he's the reason you survived the Depression. Other people, they say what he did nothing for the Depression. Both are going to have arguments because, again, American people aren't going to rise up. They're not going to put in place a dictator like you see in other countries. But the Depression is going to continue well into or throughout Roosevelt's not only first term, but through his second term. So it's not like he ended the Great Depression. So which is it? I don't know. I don't know if I'm right, but I think what FDR did is he didn't end the Great Depression. We're going to see government spending in World War II will end the Depression. But he is going to get the American people through the Depression. I think that some of the stuff he did might be touching on the edge of going too far, but at the same time, if you didn't go too far, you might fall like into what Nazi Germany's happens in Nazi Germany, what happens in Mussolini's Italy. So you needed extreme measures because this was an extreme time. So whether probably not a savior, but also probably not a destroyer, didn't get the U.S. out of the Great Depression. I think he got him through the Great Depression. So very divisive guy. All right. So what we're going to talk about next time, the thing that will get the U.S. out of the Depression is government spending and this new war that's going to come up beginning in 1941, or at least that's when the U.S. is going to enter it.